Alright, welcome to Bluescreen Bronies. We have a special interview with Steffan Andrews, orchestrator for My Little Pony. He's also a composer for Littlest Pet Shop, Voltron Force, Pound Puppies, Rated A for Awesome, League of Super Evil, and Kid vs. Cat.
That's right.
I gotta ask, before we get started here, the pun master of Twitter, how do you come up with your puns?
I don't honestly know. That's the best answer I got. They just they arrive in my brain, and I have to output them somewhere.
Draco, you just can't ask a master for their secrets.
I gotta try. I've got nothing. I've got one good one every, maybe week or so, and then nothing.
I have a lot of free time and very little friends, so that probably helps.
Oh, that's no good. Alright, now, most people would know you from My Little Pony, since it's a Brony podcast anyway. You do orchestration and composition on multiple different animations, rather. For someone that is not musically inclined, I've done music theory and I have a hard time explaining it to non-musically inclined people. What's the difference between orchestration and composition?
Well, I mean, there's lots of kind of different tiers or levels in music production. Sometimes one person really kind of wears all the hats and they do everything. Sometimes they have a team, and there's different stages that can get handled by different people. And the difference between composition and orchestration, when it comes to songs, for example, which is by far, the largest contingent on Pony that I'm involved with, the songs are written by one person. Daniel Ingram writes the songs, and then he passes them along to me. And the stage that they're in when I'm working on them is in, pretty rough, pretty bare form in terms of the instrumentation. Like the harmony is there, the melody's there, and we've got the vocals recorded. And then it's kind of my job to orchestrate it, meaning, we kind of arrive at a style that we want for the song, and then I make the choices for what instruments or what ensemble, what sections are going to play it. And that kind of comprises my job on the songs from sort of beginning to end.
Alright, so the composer basically writes the music and you make it play in one sense of the word or the other.
Yeah, and it's kind of different for different parts of the series that we work on. Like when it comes to underscore, the background music, and not necessarily songs, then it's a little more like you're wearing lots of hats. The composer, whether it's me or Daniel or whoever's working on the series, we write the music and we orchestrate it and we produce it and we pump it out, because there's a lot more of it to go through. The songs are a lot more of kind of a staged process, and there's a lot more polish and a lot more time that is spent, per capita, like per minute, if you had to compare.
Mm-hmm. While we're on the topic of the creation of the music, we see you've also worked in both film and games. How's it like working on a film or a game different to a TV show?
They're pretty different. And I haven't done a whole lot of game stuff or film stuff, but I've done enough to know kind of what I prefer. I mean, I love working on film because it's a much broader format. You have a lot more time to express the ideas and the musical statements that you're trying to express. With television, things are more compressed, obviously, because the format is much shorter. You got a 22-minute block. And the type of show that you're working on can be a lot more punctuated. So the music cues are not long and drawn out that sort of sweep under entire scenes for minutes on end. Sometimes you'll have just lots of little very short cues kind of bumping into each other to accent the humor, accent what's happening on screen. And I kind of prefer working on film because it's a little more like writing music for the sake of writing music. You get to kind of work with themes and you get to kind of develop them over time, and you have a cohesive piece of music usually that you can listen to. The production end is quite a bit different too. Film, usually you have a lot more time to compose the music, to get it orchestrated and to get it produced. Television it's very fast. It's kind of a weekly ordeal, similar to broadcast dates. There's a new show every week or two. The production cycle for post-production, so the sound effects, audio, and music, is similar. We have to turn around an entire television show episode a week, pretty much, and turn around all the music for it. So it's a pretty big job. For games, it's kind of like film, but it's even more elongated. games can take years to be developed, depending on whether you're working for like a big console title or if you just work on a little iPhone game or something. Time span might be shorter for that, but sometimes the music can be written well in advance. The difference with the gaming stuff primarily is that it has a whole host of restrictions and kind of approaches that are necessary for it. Because a lot of games don't necessarily just loop a track. There'll be layers to the music that can dynamically be brought in and out by the actual game engine itself. And so to write music that can loop seamlessly and have all those layers be present or non-present, plus the requirement that games have for the actual sound quality. They require certain frequency ranges to be filled and certain frequency ranges to be ducked for sound effects or if there's dialogue. There's just way more stuff you have to be concerned about on the game end of things. So, working on game music is fun and it's a little more open-ended, but at the same time, you've got a lot of these restrictions that you've got to keep in the back of your head while you're pumping out tracks.
It sounds really intense and kind of, I guess you could say, restrictive to the creative flow a little bit, because some things you might not work so well with the game. Now, since we're on the game subject, I gotta ask, since it's in your resume, you have Rome from Somatone Interactive on it. Now, is that the Rome Total War series?
No, this was a smaller game that I think was being developed for, I can't remember if it was like an iPhone game or if it was a platformer, like a desktop platformer. But it wasn't the same title.
I gotta say, we did a little bit of homework about that. We tried to find it, and we found nothing. It's like it doesn't exist.
I know. That's what I mean about it. I've only had so much game experience because I kind of came from a world early on where I wanted to do game music and film music, and then I found myself in an environment where there was a lot of cartoons and television happening. And so I decided to go with television. I could have pursued the games further, but I just kind of enjoyed working on cartoons more, and I just kind of fell into it, to be honest.
So it's safe to assume you still have an interest in doing music for games then? Would you look for more jobs in the game industry?
Yeah. I'd be totally up for that. I haven't been actively looking because I've been swamped with work, and like I say, the games sort of end of things has been less interesting for me, and the television stuff has been more, I think, creatively engaging, I suppose I could say. But I could see that happening in the future. Why? You have any suggestions?
Sadly not, but I wish you all the luck with it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
The only thing that I could say music-wise that kind of inspired me was a lot of Nobuo Uematsu music from Final Fantasy series, Lost Odyssey, Blue Dragon, that kind of stuff. The guy's a genius. And I noticed on your OC remix, thanks to Viral who found this, by the way, you got a lot of Nobu music on here. You've got Blackwing, or you've got the One Wing Angel.
Yep.
Remix, basically Genova. You've got songs from Chrono Trigger too. So you've got Earthbound, Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy VII. What's there to not love?
Yeah, I know.
How'd you get started in that?
Well, some of those come from a long time ago. I started, doing a bit of game music stuff, I think 10, 12, 13 years ago, kind of when OC Remix popped up and started hosting music. But like I say, I'm a relatively young guy. So I was still into that very much. And then as things kind of went along, I transitioned from, doing stuff on the hobby side, like doing video game music remixes and started doing music for a living, which happened, like I say, not to be video games so much. But I've got a real love and appreciation for video game music, and that's genuine. I still do today. In fact, the next project that's coming out on OC Remix is the Final Fantasy VI project, and I've got a track that's coming out on that one as well.
Love 6. Love it.
Same here.
Yeah, I think it's got to be my favorite soundtrack. Very close to Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy II, which was Final Fantasy IV.
Now, I love the classic music of that, but I tend to gravitate more towards the newer style, the full orchestral, I guess you could say symphonic melodies and tunes that are in video games, like Lost Odyssey. They kind of convey more feeling rather than just something to fill the space. I mean, I don't want to dumb down Final Fantasy VI or the games that came before it with the limited ability that the Super Nintendo and Nintendo had. It's just more of Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, 10, 12. The music was just so much more emotional.
Well, I mean, everybody's got a different viewpoint on that, I guess. I mean, to be fair, for the older games, if they had a live orchestra at their disposal and were technically able to include it in the games, I'm sure they would. I'm sure that's something they wanted to do, but if you really analyze what Nobuo and many of the composers did for older Nintendo and Super Nintendo games, from a musical and technical standpoint, like what they were able to do with that game synthesizer was just amazing. And they really pushed the boundaries if you understand the interworkings of the synthesizer engine and what it was capable of and how much you could fit on a ROM cartridge and all that stuff. And that's why I say I have a very deep respect for that. And that's why it kind of spurs people like me and others to want to recreate those old pieces of music that we kind of grew up on, but realize them in, like you say, a live symphonic orchestra, whether it's real or whether it's mocked up using, the latest samples and computer instruments and stuff.
So as we can see, some of the songs on your OC Remix page are actually uploaded quite a while ago, one of them dating back to 2000.
Yeah.
Would you say your work on there has ever influenced something on your TV shows or vice versa?
Well, it's kind of funny. From time to time, I'll get people telling me that the stuff that I write kind of sounds a bit like Final Fantasy, or, they'll recognize maybe some influences. I don't know if I necessarily recognize them because I've listened to so much stuff, obviously, in my lifetime that I kind of draw little bits from everything and kind of put it together, the best that I feel like that I appreciated, and whether it's film music or game music or something that inspired me. But yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. It's not often, but people have said that.
Yeah, the Earthbound one, we're around the same age, and that Earthbound one was right when we were starting high school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think those were right when I was leaving high school. And of course, that was right back in that crux, that time period where the computer music scene was just getting started. Like you had the Creative coming out with their Sound Blaster Oz 32 and 64, and it was like, oh, there was sound fonts, and there was all these new instruments and all this cool stuff that you could do. And I think I had like Sony's, well, I don't know if it was Sony back then, but it was Acid Pro, and I was totally getting down and dirty with that stuff. Actually, it's funny because some of those really old remixes that are up there, I think they kind of lend themselves more towards electronica and more like, I think Fatboy Slim, his kind of mid-90s to late 90s stuff was a big influence on me for that.
Wow, Fatboy Slim, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Yeah, artists go through different evolutions in their own style, and I just kind of feel like that era was kind of his era that I really, really dug. And so I'd, sit down and make my own loops, and I'd try to like emulate everything that he was doing, and it was mostly for fun, like I say.
I do think having those influences when you're younger is a great credence to how you work nowadays. Would you care to list any more influences?
Like just musical, creative influences?
Yeah.
Oh man, I could probably be here forever.
Yeah, you never ask a music major that.
Yeah. Well, if I had to scroll through my playlist and figure out what it is. I mean, I really look up to a lot of film music composers, largely contemporary, from the last few decades. I'm not surprisingly that big of a classical guy. I have a bit of a knowledge and a very deep appreciation for it, but in terms of orchestral and symphonic stuff, I really kind of found my sweet spot with film music of all sorts, but largely orchestral film music, because it kind of marries the best of orchestral symphonic stuff with kind of pop elements, like repeating themes, repeating chord progressions, and obviously more recently like actual elements of synthesizers and pop group stuff like bass guitars and hybrid type stuff.
Now you have a deep respect and understanding of the video game composition and orchestral design, even back during the 8 and 16-bit wars, I guess you can call it.
Yeah.
Do you have like a favorite video game that you used to play, maybe for the music or for the gameplay, and it had terrible music?
Oh man. Well, yeah. Well, I just absolutely love Final Fantasy VI and the Chrono Trigger. In fact, just a few months ago, I haven't really pulled out any old Super Nintendo games in a long time, and I actually pulled it out and I played all the way through Final Fantasy VI, and it was it was largely for the story, but mostly for the music. And I think it's kind of that magical pairing between the story and the music happening at the same time. It's like you watch a film, and the music that carries the scenes really moves you emotionally. The difference being that video games are like interactive films, which are much longer format, 40, 60 hours to play through some of these. And I've gotten all the way up to, I think, the final battle now, and I just had to put it away because work's picked up a lot more. But yeah, absolutely. And in its own original format, like, I still listen to the old, and you might argue that it's because you spend so much time with it, right? Anything you spend time with, you usually form a love for. But listening to that again in its entirety, from start to finish, hearing all of the music for the game in the game for the first time in probably over 15 years, 10, 15 years. I can't even remember the last time I played the game through. It's pretty powerful, and it really reminded me why I love those games in the first place.
It's certainly one of the beauties of the game industry when it allows you to immerse yourself that deeply. Have you ever felt that way about any other games, or?
For different reasons, I suppose. Like the reason why the long format RPGs stand out is because you're so invested in them. They have a lot of character development and a long story arc. It's like reading a good book almost. But at the same time, there's other games I've played, like Halo, the whole Halo franchise and the Uncharted franchise, that I just love. Like, the music is really good. And whether you want to argue it's good from a technical standpoint or a production standpoint, I think they're right for the games. Like, the Halo music started out relatively simple, and it still is kind of simple, maybe even in the later games. But I think it's right. Like, it totally makes the game work. Whereas the Uncharted series, it has like a fully blown out orchestral soundtrack that sounds like trailer music. Like, it's big, epic, and it really suits the tone of the game. And that's what I love, is not just the quality of the music itself, but what the music does for the game. And I kind of keep that in my head when I listen to the soundtracks apart from the game too. So yeah, it's very much an emotional kind of investment at that stage, especially after having played the games.
All right, now I got kind of a silly question. If you have ever heard me talk, and this is going towards the viewers, I keep talking about music makes a game worthwhile, and there's a lot of games that have very terrible music. To your knowledge, what was the last game you played that had really terrible music in it?
Really terrible? Oh, sheesh. I don't know if I've got one on the tip of my tongue for that. Maybe I don't like to focus on on those things, or I just block them out of my mind and don't play them again.
Sounds like a good plan.
Oh, shoot. I know there's definitely ones. I don't know if I have any that I can think of right away.
I know there's been a ton that I've played that had just had terrible music, and it was mostly the spin-off games, and really, to be honest with you, there's a lot of games out there. There's not too many, but there's more than 50 that have no music whatsoever, and it kind of is just boring and dull.
There was one iPhone game that I played recently that I did absolutely abhor the music. It was just awful, and I actually can't really remember which game it was. Again, probably because I've blocked it out of my memory.
It wasn't a certain special Game Loft game, was it?
No. But like, literally, I'm not even kidding. Like, I didn't want to play the game again because it was so off-putting.
Yeah, there's more games than I like to admit that have terrible soundtracks. I remember the days when Final Fantasy 7 and 8 came out. The soundtracks were right next to them at the game store, and you could buy the game and the soundtrack. Soundtrack was, I think it was $20 back then. not this $30, $40.
Or more, yeah.
And the games were like $50, $50. So, but the game music itself was awesome. People listened to it for a long time. And then I like the fact that Nobuo went back and basically recreated them with the Black Mages.
Yeah.
Now, is there a certain soundtrack or a certain song that you would like to go back and do that if you had unlimited resources and unlimited talent? What song or soundtrack would you like to remake, game or movie-wise?
Do you mean write originally from scratch or reproduce the existing music?
Reproduce, but better quality.
Reproduce. That's hard because there's a number of games that I've really would love to do that. Reproduce. I think Earthbound would be one of them, and probably Chrono Trigger. I think I wouldn't want to touch the Final Fantasies because they've been done a lot, and I kind of hold them in too high esteem. Like I'd rather, if you love something, just set it free, right?
Right.
And that's why I think it's taken so long for this Final Fantasy VI project to materialize, because I think everybody who's been involved with the site and the projects to date have they wanted to let everything kind of mature and let everyone kind of get a little older and gestate a bit before they dived into it, because you want to do it well and you want to have something to be proud of. And I think a lot of people really hold the game in high esteem. But they didn't want to kind of launch into it, lightly.
I gotta move it back to the My Little Pony thing because we haven't really talked too much about that.
Yeah, let's do it.
What was your favorite song to just basically put woodwinds or brass or string instruments to? What was your favorite song to actually, I don't want to say compose, but to build?
Yes, to to flesh out. My favorite one, I really like This Day area. I think because it was kind of special. There wasn't much in the series up until then in the way of any sort of villain song or any sort of dark and brooding, legitimately. Everything's been sort of very happy and light, and it was a real departure, and so that was a lot of fun to do.
Now, considering we're on the topic of MLP songs, and while it's known that, the Brony fandom is rather big, how did you feel when you first found out that everyone was into these songs? Like, how you felt when you first realized the fandom loved these songs?
Well, I mean, it was pretty incredible, and it still is. I still don't even really understand it, because in my experience, television in general, whether it has songs or not, really doesn't get a lot of exposure and doesn't get a lot of feedback. Like, I've worked on a number of television series over the years, and I've never seen anything close to the kind of response that this show has had. And yeah, the songs obviously get a lot of the attention. And it's just, I'm flabbergasted to see stuff. I haven't seen even a fraction of the renditions and covers and variations that people have done that are out there. I know very few of, some of the people that are out there doing these, some of the artists and remixers and people. But it's also a matter of time. I haven't had a lot of time and just to go and explore them and listen to some of that stuff. It's still, like I say, it's still amazing to me. And it just keeps going. There's no end to it in sight.
No, the doors have been blown off this barn, and we're going to have to raise it all over again.
Yeah, and I mean, because of that, I've made it to a number of the conventions, and I've been on a few panels, and it's quite exhilarating. It's quite cool. And really, I'd never expected that, to be honest. And I think kind of the not to put too much of a self-pat on the back, but when we started in season 1, very little was materializing on My Little Pony in terms of fandom or on the internet, and then things started surfacing. But it wasn't really the music at first. It was mostly, the internet memes and things that were popping up, and it kind of looked like a bit of a joke. And then shortly after, I think the trajectory of the fandom in general was kind of met with the level of like fan musicians and people doing songs and mashups and remixes and things. And I get why there's a huge kind of following and fandom for the show itself, because the characters are great and the voice actors are hilarious and the writing's really good. But I never really thought that the songs would be as kind of elevated as they are in terms of people's interest and people's creation, their generation of content and stuff that's out there.
Which brings me to my next question. How do you feel about specifically the musicians of the fandom, their levels of creativity in creating something from something you've already created?
Well, it's like I say, it's kind of cool, and it's a little overwhelming sometimes because there's so much of it out there. And once in a while, someone will send something to me, and I'll take a look at it because it's like a recreation of maybe the instrumentation from a song, and it's all done up from scratch. And I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff out there, a lot of really not so good stuff too. I only say that because it's more like I've worked on these songs for a bazillion hours and they're like ingrained into my head. So if there's anything that strays from the original harmony or the original, ornamentation on the instrumentation, it's like, okay, that's good. My analytical side pops into gear and I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna fix that.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have that even in the art side. Not everything be a Mona Lisa, unfortunately. Then again, for every one stick figure we get like 10 Mona Lisas. So.
Yeah, don't get me started on the stuff that's out there in terms of like non-music. The artwork, the fan art is absolutely, blows my face off. It's amazing. And the stuffed critters, the plushies that people make, because I've seen all this stuff sold at the conventions too. And like some of this stuff is as good or better than, the official corporate merchandise for these shows. It's crazy.
I think it's more because the corporate merchandise is kind of lacking. Just the Twilight and Pinkie Pie stuffed animals with the ribbon hair kind
of... Well, I haven't seen a lot of the official merchandise, actually. So I can't draw any comparisons. Not that I'd be comfortable in doing that anyways. But yeah, the fan stuff especially, either it complements the stuff that's out there, but as I understand it, a lot of the fans are making money from selling this stuff too, which is incredible because there's a whole umbrella economy that exists within the fandom as well.
Oh, most definitely. You've got that in a lot of other fandoms. I've got to talk about another animation that you composed for that is another rework of an 80s cartoon that's not quite as popular as My Little Pony, but Voltron Force.
Yeah.
I mean, Voltron was one of the first animes that I ever watched growing up, and I still have some of the die-cast Metal Lions. How did you land that gig?
Oh yeah, well that's cool. I've also got one of the original 1981, I think Go Lions. I can't remember if it's one of the Ds or what it is. It's been a while since I've got it, but it's sitting on the shelf. I pride myself on having at least one piece of official merch from every show that I work on.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, when the first Voltron figure came out, you had to buy 5 different lions, and that's where they made their money, because metal back then was sort of cheap, but it wasn't cheap toys. They're like $30, and you spent maybe like 2-3 weeks getting the money to buy it. But regardless, the new VAs... the story doesn't stay exactly the same, but how did you feel making the music doing? Did you want to pay homage to the older cartoon, or did you want to basically tell a new story with your music?
Well, I mean, that was kind of a discussion, between the music team and the production team. World Events Productions that owns the licensing for Voltron, and they wanted to introduce kind of a new element while maintaining a bit of the old flavor. And if you've seen the newer series, you'll know that we've used the original Voltron theme quite a number of times in the show itself. It's a bit of, I guess I can't say fan service because it's it's the actual show, but yeah, they wanted to take the story and the characters and the music in kind of a new direction. While having the old theme in there as well. So we placed, Needle Drop. We placed the original theme in there multiple times, but in the actual underscore that I wrote, there was many places where I quoted the original theme in the instrumentation itself. Sometimes it's subliminal, sometimes it kind of pops out a bit more. But, we worked out a new theme for the team that gets repeated throughout the new series. and the instrumentation itself is bigger. It's a little more cinematic than the original series. The original series sounded very, very 80s. It did have orchestral elements, but it had a lot more, of that kind of typical 80s flair to it. And we wanted to kind of bring it into, let's make it modern.
All right, just want to go ahead and end this with one last question. Basically, Season 3 was controversial in a lot of ways. Season 4 is coming up rather soon. Is there anything you wish that you could have done in Season 3 that was not conveyed well, that you wish you could do better?
Well, it would have been nice to make the finale longer, make it a two-parter. And I think a lot of people felt that way. It would have been a bit difficult because of the format, because there were so many songs. It kind of needed to be from start to finish in one sitting. Like if it was broken up as a two-parter, or like 1 week and then you come back the next week, it might have kind of lost a bit of the flair, But I only say that because I would have loved to have done more. Like, I don't necessarily think it could have been better. I just would have liked to have put more music in that, and put more songs in that, and really kind of pay it service, because it's a huge stepping stone in terms of the story arc of the show. But I think it was received pretty well, and for having only 13 episodes, there was only so much that could have been done in season 3 anyhow. And obviously that's kind of out of my control and out of the music production side of things, our control. And season 4 is going to be great. To be honest, I don't know a lot about it. I don't even know when it's airing. You probably know more about that than I do. There's going to be some cool stuff, and obviously there's going to be songs, but I can't really talk about what's coming up.
Of course not. Thank you very much for coming on the show today with us, Steffan.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for us, too.
Thank you so much, Steffan, again, for coming in. All right, my name's Draco. This is my co-host, Crescendo. And Steffan Andrews is a guy you should all know and admire, because without him, the music would sound like 2 strings on a pole.